За сайн байна уу? Өдрийн төргий. За өнөөдөр учраас цаг зав гаргаад оролцож байгаа та бүхэндээ баярлалаа. Миний хувьд бол Novelsoft-ийн яг бизнес хөгжүүлэлтээр нь ажиллаад явдаг байгаа. За юу нь бол одоо чиний хараад дэлгэц би ерөнхийдөө зүгээр яриад явчих гэсэн юу байна. За ерөнхийдөө бол одоо ингээд сүүлийн 2 жилийн хугацаанд ковидаас шалтгаалаад ч юм те одоо дижитал шилжилт технологийн одоо төвшил маань нэлээд хурцтай явж байгаа. Хурцтай яваад байгаа те. Тэгэнгүүт одоо нөгөө яг ийм програм хөгжүүлдэг ч юм уу те яг одоо манай компанид бол түрүүн хэлсэнчлэн нэлээд олон төрлөөр үйл ажиллагаа явуулдаг. Тэрний маань нэг чиглэл нь ялцчихгүй програм хангамж хөгжүүлэлт, мобайл аппликейшн хөгжүүлэлт гэдэг ийм одоо чиглэлээр ажилладаг одоо ажиллаж явдаг. За тэгээд одоо энэ яг өнөөдрийн энэ хурцтай явагдаж байгаа энэ нийгэмдэр бол ялцчихгүй бид бол одоо яг програм хөгжүүлэлтийн багийн хувьд чанартай бүтээгдэхүүнийг аль болох богино хугацаанд эцсийн хэрэглэгчдэд хүргэх гэдэг нэг юм сорилт тулгараад ерөнхийдөө явж байгаа. За энэ сорилтын хүрээнд бол ерөнхийдөө яаж бид нар одоо яг хөгжүүлж байгаа програм хангамжийнхаа чанарыг илүү одоо сайн байлгах вэ, илүү үр дүнтэй одоо ажиллах вэ гэдэг талаасаа ерөнхийдөө бол судлаад ялцчгүй тестийн автоматжуулалтыг хэрэгжүүлэх шаардлагатай байна гэсэн дүгнэлтэнд хүрсэн байгаа. За тэгээд тестийн автоматжуулалтыг бол ерөнхийдөө манай програм хөгжүүлэлтийн багийнхан бол өөрсдийнхөө хэрэгжүүлж байгаа төсөлтгүүдээр ашиглаад явдаг. За ерөнхийдөө бол манай яг ийм салшгүй нэг юм хэсэг болчиход явж байгаа л да. За тэгээд бид ерөнхийдөө үүний хүрээнд бол одоо хүрсэн үр дүн одоо хүрсэн үр дүнгээ одоо бусдтай хуваалцъя гэсэн үднээс өнөөдрийнхөө энэ вебинарыг зохион байгуулж байгаа. За өнөөдрийн вебинар дээр ерөнхийдөө юу ярих гэхээр тест автоматжуулалт маань өөрөө яг буцаагаад яг энэ хөгжүүлэлтийн цикл дээр одоо яг энэ continuous integration, continuous deployment гэж яригдж байгаа тийм. За энэ DevOps дээр ерөнхийдөө хаана байршиж яаж ажилтгийг, за энийг одоо яг тест автоматжуулалтын процесс дээр оруулж ирснээр биднэрт ямар үр өгөөж үнцийг өгөх юм бэ гэдгийг одоо одоо энэ талаар ерөнхийдөө мэдээлэл хуваалцах өөрсдийнхөө одоо олж авсан бэлтгэсэн мэдээлэл хуваалцах юм зорилготойгоор хийсэн байгаа. За тэгээд миний хувьд бол ерөнхийдөө олон зүйл явах. Ер нь ерөнхийдөө яг вебинарынхаа үндсэн контент руугаа ороод зөвмөрөө яг танилцаад явъя гэсэн бодолтой байна. За тэгээд та бүхэн одоо хэрэгтэй мэдээлэл өгч чадна гэж найдаж байна. За асуултууд байх юм бол та админ чатынхаа дээр бичээд үлдээгээрэй. Бид бүгдэнд нь одоо айлгуулах хариулаад явах гэж байна. За баярлалаа.
And maybe good evening to anyone that is joining on this webinar. Thank you for joining, and thank you Novelsoft for hosting this. Today we're going to talk about maximizing the return on investment of user interface test automation through continuous testing. Now, just a quick introduction for myself. My name is Christoph Sunthorn. I'm a solutions engineer with the SmartBear company. I'm based in Melbourne, Australia at the moment, and that's where I'm talking to you from today. And I specialize in test automation. So this is why I'm talking to you today about UI test automation. So just wanted to add a few more housekeeping items in the beginning, which is I do believe this session is recorded, so you can contact Novelsoft after this session if you would like a copy of everything we're going through today. Now, if you do have any questions, we do have a live Q&A at the end, as you saw in the introduction. However, if you have any questions while I'm talking, please feel free to put them in the chat box or the Q&A box in Zoom, and the Novelsoft team will look to answer those questions, and I'll be answering questions at the end with them as well. So for today's webinar, the agenda is about why you should automate UI tests in the first place, and then how you write robust or reliable UI tests, and then how UI testing fits into a CI/CD pipeline, and then how do you generate helpful bug reports for the rest of your team? And then I will go through a very short demo just to show an example of a good test automation tool. Obviously, we think SmartBear Test Complete is a good test automation tool, so that's what we will be showing you today. Now, for those of you that don't know about SmartBear, just a very short introduction today. So SmartBear is a global company with our headquarters in Boston, and we were founded in 2009. Since then, we've grown to 12 global offices, and like I mentioned in my introduction, I'm talking to you from Melbourne, Australia at the moment. Now, we have over 16 million users of our tools designed to ensure quality across the entire software development lifecycle, and over 24,000 customers from small to medium businesses all the way to enterprise names like Google, Microsoft, and Adidas. Globally, we have over 650 employees. And also, as you may know, SmartBear currently supports 3 open source initiatives, which are Swagger and the Open API specification for API design and collaboration, and then SOAP UI for API and web service testing, which is a pretty popular API testing tool, and then Cucumber for behavior-driven development. And I do believe the Novelsoft team with Dash and Tamir at the end will probably show a little bit of a BDD example as well. Now at SmartBear, our mission is to be the first choice for developers when you think of quality. So if you look at this slide here of our solutions, you can see we have platforms and tools to help you along your development journey, from designing on the left, then moving on to testing, monitoring, and then managing. And more importantly, these tools and solutions all easily integrate with your team's existing source control, CI/CD, and any dev tools as well. So you can see with the commit tools here, and then also maybe some API gateway tools and also Docker tools as well. So we integrate well with your existing tool set already. Now today we'll be mainly talking about UI test automation. So we will be touching on Test Complete, which allows you to test desktop, web, and mobile applications, all from within Test Complete, just one platform. And then we also have Load Ninja if you need to do web performance testing. And I'll also talk about our device labs, so cross-browser testing and Bitbar. So in case you need to test on, a different browser, a different operating system, or let's say a different mobile phone that you don't have in your own team, then this is where our device labs can extend your test coverage. All right, so let's talk about ROI and UI testing. So first of all, we need to ask, what does return on investment mean to you, like your own organization? So most organizations will measure return on investment, or ROI, differently, depending on what is a priority for you and what goals you are trying to meet. So it's really important for you to define your own categories of ROI that you want to measure, so you can properly understand how successful your own automation processes are. So let's use some examples just from the industry. So maybe one ROI is you want less downtime. So you want less failures in your application or systems. Another one might be frequency of releases. So especially with the pandemic, the world is now moving to a digital world. So a lot of what we used to do is now on a digital platform. And now customers are demanding that, these platforms have new features being added all the time, which means you need to keep making more releases. So maybe this is one ROI you want to have. You want to be able to meet the demands of your increasing updates and release cycles. And then there's simply the ROI of better quality. Maybe you just want a better quality application so your customers have a better experience. Then you might also want to increase your test coverage, meaning that instead of only testing a few areas of your application, you actually want to cover more critical areas of the application, and then even some of the less common areas that can still cause issues for your organization or business if there are problems. So test coverage is an important one too. And then there might be reduced infrastructure costs as well. So similar to the less downtime category, this might mean that you just want less system failures, which would mean less costs on your infrastructure. So now that we've defined what ROI categories we're looking for our organization, so what's important to us, we need to ask, what do we want to automate in the first place? So essentially, we want faster release cycles. So if you look at the graph here, if we're doing manual testing using a typical waterfall software development lifecycle, you can see that the release time can take up to weeks or even months with some of the customers that we work with, because there's low automation when you're doing manual testing. But you'll see as you start to move along in your automation journey in your team, maybe you start using some bulky or older automation tools, and you're starting to move towards an agile system. Now, as you move to more robust tools, so more established tools such as SmartBear's Test Complete, or some open source tools like Selenium or Appium, as an example, you start becoming more agile as a team, and you can start to see that the time of your releases will be reduced. And then the next step of the journey is really continuous testing, which is what we're talking about today, which is where it's more aligned with DevOps, and you have CI/CD. So continuous integration, continuous delivery. And then finally, the next step, we're not quite there yet as a testing industry, is autonomous testing, which is where AI is doing all the testing for you. So there's no person there, maybe recording or writing scripts. It's just AI testing your application for you. Now, this is obviously where the testing industry is looking to move towards. That is the natural next step, but we're not quite there yet as an industry. But you can see as you move along, there is less time taken to release your software, which is the most important thing, because at the end of the day, we want more time back to business goals. So whether that be more speed, more quality with your software or solutions for your customers, whether it's reducing the costs, whether it's having more time for better culture in the business or organization, or just simply time that instead of repeating manual tests, that you can spend time to innovate your solution or your product. This is why we want to automate. So more time for business goals. So again, this is why test automation is really needed, because this entire software development lifecycle is supposed to happen really fast. So you can see you've got the check-in process of code, and then you build the application. Then you need to perform unit tests. Then you might need to do integration tests, with more than just the code itself. You need to make sure the code works with other applications. Then you might have some performance or load testing. Again, you need to integrate all of these components together. And then you need to perform some release management and then deploy it to production. So this whole process is supposed to happen really fast. But what we find is that the testing process, so you see here the black at the bottom, this process, the testing parts are usually the bottleneck to our software development lifecycle. So this is why test automation is important. If we can automate this, these 3 steps here, we can speed up this entire process. So further to that, more benefits of automation is that, like I said, you get faster development cycles. So you reduce the time spent in the testing phase of development, and it becomes just part of the workflow and not a bottleneck. Then you have increased test coverage. So you're able to build testing into your entire application to increase the quality, while also not increasing the test time when it comes to deploy. So if you used to manually test, maybe you couldn't test all areas of the application because you didn't have enough time. But now that you start automating your test, the computer's doing this for you. So you have plenty of time to cover as many areas of the application as you need and uncover more problems before they get to the customer. So again, as I was mentioning, faster time to resolution. So you will get instant feedback from your test results back to the development team. So you get faster bug releases, and that means your bugs get fixed before they go out to customers. So those are the benefits of UI testing and automating that. Now, when we talk about UI tests, we have to acknowledge that there are a number of challenges to create and automate our tests. So let's just talk through some of these first, and then after this, I will talk about some of the solutions and recommendations that we have come across. So the first challenge is dynamic IDs. So if you think about an application, there might be a button on the screen or some object on the screen. Now, the way we might identify that object is with an ID. But if that ID keeps changing from, you know, let's say text box 1, and then next time it's text box 28, as an example, that can be a challenge when we're creating our tests because it's not consistent. So just something we need to think about. Now, the other thing we need to think about as a challenge is a maintenance of test scripts. So as we build more tests and try to cover more areas of our application, you will start to build up a lot of test scripts, and it becomes hard to know, you know, what test is doing what, which test is testing a particular component. So maybe there are 50 tests which are all logging in. So if there is an update to your application for the login screen, you know, how do you manage that when there are 50 tests that you need to update? So just something you need to think about. And then again, similar to dynamic IDs, if you have object properties that keep changing, it's very difficult to automate, because if something keeps changing, how does the computer know to look for the same object? So again, just something that is a challenge. Also, what we find is if you're using XY coordinates or screen position or images, it can be very difficult to automate your test, because, for example, if a button is to move from the right side to the screen to the left side, suddenly your test cannot find the button anymore and your test is broken. So just another challenge to think about. And then lack of scripting expertise. So if we think about the testing team, not everyone is an experienced programmer that can write some scripts and, you know, program your test case. So this is why it's important to have a testing solution that allows all users from your organization, or maybe if you start to bring new people in your team, that it's easy for everyone to jump in and start helping with the testing process. And then lastly, increased complexity in technology used to build the application. So we're seeing now in an API-driven world where everything is digital and communicating with each other, you'll find that sometimes applications have some dependency on another application. So this is something that we need to think about when we're creating our UI tests. So then, now that we talked about the challenges, let's talk about how do we make these UI tests more robust and scalable for the future as your organization grows. So some recommendations include isolating your tests from dependencies where possible. So as I was mentioning before, with applications becoming more complex and relying on other services, if we think about, for example, application that needs to rely on, let's say, Salesforce or a weather API, if those services aren't available when you're testing your own application, maybe your test will fail. But there's actually nothing wrong with your application. It's just that it couldn't contact, let's say, the Salesforce or the weather service. So we need to find a way to isolate our tests, whether it be virtualizing or mocking our services. So there are solutions available to help you do that, and that will help make your UI tests more reliable too. We also want to make sure that we identify the most accurate object recognition approach for your application. So depending on each application, there will be different properties or different ways to recognize objects. And so we need to do a case-by-case check, which is the best approach, and then follow that one standard. Then we also need to improve maintainability of your test project by modularizing, or let's say breaking down your test cases into smaller pieces, maybe based on, business area or user action. So if you do that over time, it will be a lot easier, as I was explaining earlier, to know what your test case is doing. You can then reuse these test cases afterwards, and it just makes it a lot easier to maintain as you go along. And I'll show you an example in the demo as well, how you can do this. And then, as I was mentioning in the beginning, you may want to virtualize or mock any backend servers to make sure that, if you can't access a service, that your own front-end code is not going to throw up any errors because, your code is still fine, but it just can't find a different service. So just something to think about. And then we also want to avoid any trivial UI tests, so any tests that are not important, because every test should be either an important user workflow for the business or a highly trafficked user workflow. So there's no reason we should be spending time on UI tests which are not important to the user at all, because that time is better spent elsewhere. And just to continue, we want to make sure that we build tests that are easy to refactor by using the don't repeat yourself principles, so the DRY principles. So that means using sensible variable names and also some other techniques, such as breaking down your tests into different business functions or user use cases. So we're thinking about logging in, logging out. These are ones you can break out, or maybe creating an order. So those are just some examples of where you can, not repeat yourself when you create UI tests. Then we need to talk about including any edge cases or negative cases for each test. And we need to do this to ensure complete coverage and to avoid unexpected errors, even though you are passing tests. So the best example of a negative test case is, for example, putting in, if we're logging in to a web portal and we put in the wrong username and password, we actually want the system to fail. So that's an example of a negative test case. So that indicates that if it fails, that our system is working correctly. So it's important to include these test cases as well. We also want to improve reliability by adding wait times for asynchronous processes or any data loading or web page loading, or just any other cases where you're asserting a state change. So this is pretty common in that, you know, something has not loaded before your test automation tool is going to the next step. So to increase the reliability of our test, we sometimes need to include wait times to make sure it just doesn't fail for something as simple as not updating in time. And lastly, it's about choosing a good testing framework. As I mentioned, we want to make sure that the testing framework or solution is accessible to everyone, not just experienced programmers. Everyone can join in. It's easy to use and easy to maintain over time. So it's important to choose a good testing framework because it will, you know, set the practice for the entire QA team. So now that we talked about UI testing challenges and then recommendations on how to overcome those challenges, now let's talk a bit more about having those UI tests and moving them towards a CI/CD pipeline and how you would integrate them together. So with continuous integration and delivery and deployment, there actually is a bit of a difference. So by definition, on the screen, you can see CI/CD is a process of continuously integrating and deploying new code into an existing code base to produce smaller, manageable changes that can be tested more often, increasing frequency of feedback. So that's a definition. But if we think about it, continuous testing is often tied to continuous integration and continuous delivery and continuous deployment. Now, while the terms are used interchangeably at times, there are slight differences and key differences between all of them, especially the last three. So let's go into it. Excuse me. So continuous integration does not deal with delivering the application to production. It only deals with getting new code into the master branch of a repository more frequently. To have this occur often, code needs to be built into smaller pieces, which also allows teams to detect issues earlier. When those bite-sized pieces of code are pushed and the application or service is packaged up, built, tested, and then deployed on a test server. Now, continuous delivery is the first level of actually getting the product into the hands of users. But the actual act of deploying the branch to production is a manual exercise, or there is some type of manual check, as you can see from the gray arrows in the continuous delivery chain. So we can see that here. So these gray arrows. But continuous deployment is the combination of continuous integration and testing and deploying to production. So all in an automated fashion. So as soon as you write your terminal git commit and leave a nice detailed message, your CI/CD system will start the entire process. And if all the tests pass, the new master branch replaces the current one in production. So with this automation in place, there is no human interaction after the code is written. So that's what we mean by continuous deployment. So you see this entire process is all orange and automated. Now, there are some challenges when we talk about CI/CD. So we know that integrating UI tests into a continuous process can be challenging. Also, we're working with different teams, so there's different skill sets from different teams having to work together. And then there's also the challenge of making sure that any of the test reports are actually actionable. So we don't just have reports, to tick a box. We need to have reports that, provide good information that the developers can make action on. So part of the solution here is really, if we think about it, let's think. So a test automation framework is only the foundation to this continuous testing approach. So when you build off automation with collaboration and instant feedback, the continuous learning begins to come up within the team, and the team can start to capture the true benefits of continual testing. So you'll see the collaboration, feedback, and the automation framework. So they all work together to have continuous learning within the team. So continuous integration allows teams to quickly ship value and features to their end users. So that's our goal in a process that requires collaboration, automation, and continuous learning. So what does this look like on a practical level? So using some of the industry solutions. So while there's no, standard structure that you have to follow, you can typically break it down in this manner here. So you'll see that with the commit and build section on the left, when a developer is finished making changes to an application, they commit their code to a shared repository. So that's Git in our example here. And so that will integrate with the central code base. Now, the piece of software or the new feature is then built from the extracted code and unit tested. So continuous integration plays an essential role here in streamlining this process by automating each step after the code is written. So that's where we start to move towards the middle, which is the automated testing side with the CI/CD pipeline. So you'll see the environments, the functional testing, and the load testing silos here. So that's where some of our tools come in to work with your CI/CD pipeline, which you can see some of the ones that we support up here. So Jenkins being an open source solution, it's pretty popular, but also another common one is Azure DevOps, which we both have plugins for Jenkins and DevOps. And then we also integrate with some of these other tools here, either through a command line interface or API. So yeah, integration on all fronts here. Now, just to continue with this practical example, so once we're in automated testing, once the new piece of software is developed, it needs to go through thorough testing to ensure it meets all the initial requirements. And there are various testing methodologies that can be used to ensure an application looks and behaves as expected. So as I mentioned, in this example, we're using a mix of, there might be Selenium, we've got test complete and cross-browser testing to complete our functional UI testing. And then during this stage, it's essential to test the entire system in various environments that are similar to the production environment, because the success of the software depends on it working on the environments that your end users and customers are working on. So this is why I mentioned cross-browser testing. So if, for example, in your organization, you don't have any Mac or Apple machines, but you need to check that your application is working on, a Mac Safari browser. So how you would achieve that without having to purchase your own Macintosh machine or MacBook is to use our cross-browser testing device lab, which gives you access to over 2,000 different configurations or platforms. Yeah, so that will certainly help you in covering that area. Now, the final area is deployment, and that's the final stage. So the built piece of software is rolled out into production. And the CD process here requires, it just needs to be all automated to ensure a reliable delivery to users. So in practice, some teams use CI/CD to run them over the weekend, every week, to provide enough runtime and a nice break in between to fix any bugs and improve the automation, while other teams run UI tests before each deployment to a new environment. So again, there's no standard process here. It depends what your organization processes are, and the tools will be able to adapt and work with your process. So what are some of the benefits of leveraging a CI/CD system? So we have increased user and customer satisfaction. So continuous integration enables stronger collaboration between developers, meaning bugs are found and fixed faster earlier in the development process. Now, running automated regression and parallel tests will improve test coverage, ensuring your application is bug-free and works across a wider range of environments. So continuously delivering smaller updates to your software will make most changes and bugs undetectable to the end user, resulting in happier customers. So we also have the benefit of faster release cycles. So speeding up the build and deploy cycle will allow you to get new features into your production quicker, meaning that you can get your product into the hands of your consumers faster. Then there's also time that's been freed up, so you can spend that on business goals, and that's from the automation. Then you also have reduced risk. So the ultimate goal of a continuous delivery process is to make each release a less dramatic and painless experience for both the QA teams and customers. So by releasing new updates or features continuously, you can reduce the risk of bugs ending up in production, and you can resolve any bugs found much faster. There's also increased transparency and communication across teams. So by working together as part of one larger workflow, instead of testing being a big bottleneck of your team, this is where the transparency and communication comes in. And then lastly, lower costs from using CI/CD. So adopting a continuous development model will lower your costs by eliminating many of the fixed costs associated with building and testing changes to the application. For example, automated environment provisioning will reduce the costs associated with maintaining your own test infrastructure. And then parallel testing will cut down on the number of machines you need to run your tests on. And by continuously committing your code, you will spend less time and therefore less money on fixing bugs. So lastly, let's talk about how do you generate those helpful bug reports to make sure they're actionable for the team? Because again, at the end of the day, the main point or goal is to have better quality output from your team. So we need to define and stick to a process. And now there's no standard process, again, as I mentioned, but these are just some recommendations that will help your team develop your own practice. So the process of creating a bug report probably seems straightforward, but it can actually grow quite complex in a very fast-paced team environment, especially, for example, if you're a startup company as well, or you're rapidly growing, it can get quite complex very quickly. So yeah, because what happens is the number of bugs will almost always exceed the number of resources that you have on your team to fix them. And making the prioritization of bugs becomes a challenge. And so you may have duplicate bug reports in a large project. So we want to avoid that by having a standard process that we build within our team. Now, some of our recommendations include once a new bug is discovered by a user or tester, the tester writes up a bug report. That's pretty obvious. Then the bug has to be assigned to the appropriate developer by the project manager with an appropriate priority as well. Then we want to make sure that once the developer fixes the bug, it's reassigned to the tester for verification that it's been repaired or squashed. Then the tester needs to verify that the bug is fixed or reopens a bug if it still exists and the process repeats. And lastly, the key to success is writing clear bug reports that are well organized in a bug tracker. So, what are the essential parts of bug reports? So again, there's no standard format, but this is what we believe will help the team have an actionable report. So we need to make sure there's a title that has a concise summary of the bug and its category, a summary. Then we need to have visual proof. So things like screenshots or videos to help the developer understand the problem faster. And you'll see in my demonstration as well that most of these components that I'm listing are actually automatically generated for you in Test Complete. So this removes the workload from the QA team in terms of generating bug reports, because these are all made for you when you run the tests automatically. Again, you'll want some expected and actual results as a comparison side by side. Again, to help to see what is wrong. You want to have the complete steps on how to reproduce the problem, because if you describe a problem but you cannot reproduce it, it makes it hard for the developer to address. Again, you'll need information about the environment to know if the problem is specific to that one environment or it's overall. And then some other things such as console logs, the source URL, and also the severity and priority, which is something that you can maintain in your own defect management tracking system. So to summarize everything that I've discussed today about maximizing your return on investment on UI test automation using continuous delivery. First of all, we need to define what ROI or return on investment means to your organization, because every organization is different. You need to be able to come together, define your own categories, because then you can measure the success of your automation journey against these ROI categories. Then you need to decide which test cases you want to automate. Now, some of our recommendations include ones that are quite repetitive, especially if you're doing them manually, any business critical test cases, any complex ones, and time consuming ones. So if you can take that time away from your tester, so they can be, let's say, building other tests to cover more areas, that's a lot better use of your time. So these are probably the main categories you want to prioritize when you're looking to automate your test cases. Now, when you do create those tests, you want to make sure that those tests are reliable and resistant to changes in the UI, because as we know, your application will always change. And when things change, we want to make sure we give our tests the best chance to continue working. So one small change doesn't break your test and you have to come back and change everything again. And then you'll want to test early and test often so you can catch those problems before they go out into production. And then, the example I was using is your customers have a bad experience, or it can even mean, a loss for a business in terms of security risks, or just a business expense in terms of maybe you're running a web store and you don't catch a problem with one of the products and you sell it for under cost. So maybe you don't detect that for a long time. So that's when by not testing early and testing often, that's going to cost the business and organization over time. And then we want to leverage the CI/CD tools to automate your pipeline where possible. So as I was explaining, the three differences between continuous integration, delivery and deployment, we want to automate as much as possible just to make the workflow a seamless, repeatable experience that doesn't require human to keep intervening and slowing down the process. And then we also need to prioritize platforms, devices, and operating systems that are relevant to your user base. So if your users are mainly using iOS devices, then you'll probably want to prioritize your testing efforts on iOS devices rather than putting too much effort into some of the less commonly used devices, as it just makes more sense, because that will affect your user base the most. And then lastly, as you saw in the last two slides, we want to ensure that your reports are actionable and they're a standard process that can be followed by your team. So if we make sure that they're actionable, it will help collaboration within the team. The developers will know what they can do to solve the problem. And again, that will just mean greater quality outputs for your team. And that's, at the end of the day, this whole process is about improving the quality of your solutions and whatever products and services that you're developing. So with that in mind, that's the end of, I guess, talking about testing and the return on investment and continuous integration. Now, just want to jump into a very short demo just to show what a good test automation solution looks like. So I will just change my screen. Give me a moment, please. Okay, actually, there we go. All right, so this is Test Complete, as I was mentioning in the beginning. This is our test automation tool for desktop, web, and mobile applications. So what you see here in the background is just a tool that we install on your Windows machine, can be your laptop, can be a virtual machine, can be your PC. It installs on all of those fine. And then basically, you see here, this is a test script that I've previously recorded already. I didn't need to write any code or script for this. I just simply recorded something. So like I said, it's important that everybody in the team can help with the testing process. You don't need to be a professional programmer. So you can see some of these steps here. You know, from the start to the end of my test, it's able to follow through all the different objects, the different sections of a web page you can see here, some of the actions where it's clicking and setting text. So this is all done automatically for me. So I might show you an example right now. I've got a blank test. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply hit record test steps, or I can hit record up here as well. So two places. And when I do this, if you think about a manual test case that you used to do, where you follow a piece of paper or an Excel worksheet, and the first step says open your web browser and to visit a web page. And then let's say you want to go to the contact us page. You want to enter some data here. And then if I hit submit here, maybe you want to, as part of this manual test case, you want to check that, you know, this text comes up as well. So you can easily do that. So with the toolbar up here, I can simply add checkpoint, choose what I want to check, drag the target onto my item. You see the red rectangle showing that Test Complete is able to, you know, recognize these objects. And then from here, I can simply, you know, make sure that it grabs the text, and this is what we're validating, and do finish. And I can close my browser at the end of it and stop my recording. And just as simple as that. So less than 1 minute, I've created my first automated test script. I no longer have to repeat this step by myself. This is all here for me. So what I can do is I can just simply hit run now. And then you'll see in the top right, test complete is playing back all my steps. And so it's going to go through. I'm not touching the keyboard or mouse here. Test complete is doing everything. We'll repeat all these steps. And then it will do the check here. And so this is actually a good example. So it's failed on me, and it actually tells you some possible problems on why it's failed. And like I was mentioning in my the slides, you want to make the test reliable. So in this case, we can see that there's a picture for what's on the screen when there's a failure as well. So I can double click this and I can have a look at the screenshot. This is a big screenshot. I've got 3 screens, but you can see the smaller one here. But basically, you can see what's on the screen. You can also see the detail of what happened here, but all the steps to reproduce what happened as well. So if you follow along, like I was mentioning, all the good practices for having an actionable, bug report, these are all automatically created for you. So when you come here, I can see something failed. And what actually happens is where we're checking for the successful message, it probably just needs a delay. So if I add a delay, as I was mentioning, good practice, sometimes if you need to wait for something on the page, it's worth adding a delay. So here I'm adding a 1-second delay. Now, if I go ahead and close this and run this, it should give me a successful playback. But this is just a quick example. I'm not going to go into much detail because I just wanted to show you the test complete main feature, which is being able to record tests very easily. No need to understand scripting or programming, and then just being able to have actionable test results. So now you actually see a successful result here. So with that 1 second, it was able to wait for this message to show on screen before it checked. And you can see some detail here as well about what it was checking. Equaled, that's why it passed, and therefore my entire test case is successful. So this provides you with an actionable test result. So just like that, 1 minute recording, and now I have a test case that I can come back and modify anytime, or play back anytime, or reuse anytime. So the last thing I want to show before I pass it back to Novelsoft, because I believe they have something a bit more advanced to show you as well, is the fact that you can break down your test into smaller sections, so it's easier to maintain your tests over time and easier to understand. So if we think about, for example, let's have a look at this test. I've got a really long test here where I'm logging in. So these steps are logging in. These steps are performing a search. These steps are logging out. Now, what you can do, what we recommend, is to always break it down. So you can right-click, add new folders. So I've already done this. You can see this with my web app folder, and then I added another folder here. So you can add as many folders that make sense for your organization, your team. And then you can add smaller tests and name them as you need. So here I've got a login, then I've got the search and the logout. And so from here, now that we have these smaller steps, you can see the login steps here, the search steps in this one, and the logout. You'll see that you don't have to re-record everything either. So for example, if I create a new test, let's call this webinar test. If I want to, maybe just copy some steps here where I just navigate to the contact us page. So we've got this here. I can just select these steps, right click, copy, and then let's see, webinar test. I can right click and paste. So again, Test Complete is all about being very easy to use, simple copy and paste, simple drag and drop with all these operations here. So again, very easy to use for everyone. So when you do this, you can start to build up, smaller tests like this, And then what you can do is I have this, end-to-end workflow where I just simply drag and drop items. So for example, here, I dragged login, search, and log out in the order I wanted. I can also drag my new webinar test into here. And now when I run this test, this will run all 4 tests at a time. Now that means, for example, if the login page was to update, I don't have to, if I had 50 different test scripts that have the login steps and the login page was to update, I don't have to go into, okay, this one here, this one, and I have to update all these steps. I only need to come to one place, change these steps here, and then everywhere that we reference this login test will be automatically updated. So this will be a huge time saver for everyone, being able to reuse tests in this fashion. Also easier to maintain as you start to scale your team up, because otherwise you'll have too many tests and you don't know what is in there. So that's really all I wanted to show, just a very quick demonstration on this side. And I might pass it back to the Novelsoft team now to just continue and show any other advanced features that they think is interesting. So I'll stop my share and pass it back to the team. So thank you. And if you have any questions on anything I've spoken about or anything that I've demonstrated, feel free to put them in the chat and I'll be happy to answer them as well.
Okay, thank you, Christoph. Christoph-ийн PPT-тэй холбоотойгоор асуултууд байвал та бүхэн чатаар явуулж болно. Эсвэл бол гараа өргөөд unmute хийгээд асуугаарай. За одоо хүмүүс ороод ирж байгаа шүү. Christoph, please see your chat.
Yep, so I got a question here. Can we get the PowerPoint or video recording? So, yep, I'll be able to share a PowerPoint with you. That's no problem. And the video recording, I believe it's being recorded by Novelsoft, so they'll be able to share that with you.
Тийм за видео рекорд нь одоо над дээр Zoom дээр хийгдэж байгаа. Тэгээд эргээд та хэд рүү имэйлээр newsletter болгоод PPT-тэй хамт нэгдсэн байдлаар явуулнаа. Окей. За асуулттай хүн байна уу? Okay, thanks. За нэг нь гараа өргөөд байна.
Okay. Hi, Christoph. Thank you for your presentation. I've got a couple of questions. So in case of mobile testing, so is it gonna be the same process as we test the web applications?
Yep. So what I demonstrated there with my web application, it will be a very similar process for a mobile application. You first would have to connect to your mobile device. So you plug it into your computer, and then you get test complete to connect to your mobile device. And then you'll be able to just record like I did on a mobile screen. And yep, you'll have the same sort of test that you can review and play back. So short answer, yes, desktop, web or mobile, same recording process that you saw.
Okay, thank you. Got another question. So in case of the bug reports, the results of the tests, is it possible to write the results to the third-party program?
Yeah, so
not only on the test complete.
Yep. So with the reports, you can, export those reports outside to any location you want. So that's possible, but also maybe what I'll do is I'll just share my screen again. So within this log, you can actually export this, and then you can share this with, through email or on a network share. But this same log is now available in one file, and you have the same screenshots available to you as well. So this is all external now, outside test complete. Now, if you're working with Jira for defect management, you can create a Jira issue straight from here too. And then it will attach the logs to that Jira issue. So again, you just need to choose a project, for example, whether it's not a bug, let's call it a story for me. Call it contact and create. And so that will go through and create an issue for me and attach the system log and information. And the other thing I probably wanted to show as well is the continuous integration site, if there is time. So you'll see here the log here. I can just download this and you'll get the same thing that I showed you before. So this is within Jira. Yep.
Okay, that's good.
So the other side of things, let me just find Azure DevOps. So using a CI/CD tool such as DevOps here, I've got a project. I've set up a pipeline. Now this pipeline could be triggered from code being committed as an example. But if we want to manually trigger this, we can do this as well. So if I go ahead and look at this pipeline and then run this pipeline, choose which agents, that's fine. And you'll see at the moment it's queued. But on my, let's say I have a testing environment where I have some agents that will run some tests. You'll see here. So on my virtual machine, I've got an Azure DevOps agent running, and now it's picked up this job. So if you assume that someone had checked in some code instead of me clicking run now, you can assume that this will be automatically picked up and just done by itself. No one needed to come to do anything. And you'll see this process is running at the moment. You can see what it's going through. So this is just one example with DevOps, but again, Test Complete will work with other tools such as Jenkins as well. There's a plugin for that. But once this completes, if I have a look, oh, yep, here we go. So this is Test Complete. You can see the DevOps agent has actually kicked off the project for us automatically in the background here. So I didn't have to do anything. It started this project. Now it looks like this test case may have some issues, but it will report that as well, just because I was playing with this window before. So it interfered, but you'll get the results. So you can actually see it failed. And from this, if we go to tests, we can actually see here within our CI/CD tool that it failed. And you can actually come into here. You can see the error message from that run. And you also have the logs attached here. So I can download this log here, and then it will open up. So now I open up this log from DevOps, and you actually see the same log outside Test Complete. So everyone can look at this log outside of Test Complete just by coming into their DevOps account. And you'll see here, it's got the screenshots and all the detail, as I mentioned. So this is all part of the continuous integration run. Now, just going back to something that passed. So just before this webinar started, I actually ran something and I actually got a successful run. So just to give you an example, so this is what happens when you get a successful run. I just need to make sure that shows up. So here we go. And again, I can download this and open just to show you, what it looks like when there's a successful test run. So there you go. So, yep, I guess that was the last thing I wanted to show you. Since the whole session was about continuous integration, it was good to see how Test Complete works with a continuous integration tool, this being Azure DevOps as an example.
Okay, that's good. Thank you very much. And I've got another little question. So while testing the application, sometimes, for example, in case of web application, sometimes the web application's loading time varies due to many causes. So in that case, maybe if the test object takes too long time to be visible. So in that case, how to let the test complete wait for the object to be visible besides delay time?
Yeah, good question. So there's a few ways you can do that. So you saw me add a manual delay in my example. However, if you want something to be more dynamic or something that's a bit more adjustable, you can definitely do it with a method of waiting for something on the screen to exist or to show up. Now, there is an example within our documentation which shows you how to do it. But basically, the logic is that you would look for something on screen, and then you would have a delay of maybe 5 seconds as an example. And then if it doesn't show in 5 seconds, to retry again, to look for it again. Now, you would, as you build your test case, you want to make sure that at some time you want to stop checking, for example, maybe after 30 seconds. So as part of this check, you would have let's say a counter that says after checking 5 times or 6 times, then to jump out of the loop that you've created to check for the item. So that's one method that you can use to do that. And our documentation shows a very good example of how to check for things showing up on screen. And I can share that with anyone in the chat if anyone is interested in that.
Okay, that's a great method, I think. Okay, thank you very much. That's all from me.
Okay.
За маш олон critical асуулт асуусан Тамирада баярлалаа. За хэдүүлээ одоо дараагийнхаа хэсэг рүү орцгоё. За би тэгэхэд дараа нь юу бэлдсэн байгаа гэхээр одоо манай автомат тестингийн баг саяхнаас гараад тэгээд энэ тестийн автоматжуулалт дээр хэдийн ажиллаад эхэлсэн байгаа. За энэ дээр өөрсдийнхөө туршлагаас хуваалцаач гээд манай Даш болон Тамир нарыг энэ вебинартаа ураад оруулж ирсэн байгаа. За Дашаа байна уу? Байна сонсогдож байна. Гэхдээ жоохон царгаад тах шиг байх юм. Хүмүүст яаж вэ?
Жоохон царгаад тах шиг.
За хин юу дэлгэцээ ширлээд өгч би эндээс стоп шир хийжээ.
Одоо царайхан хэрэг.
Одоо гайгүй сонсогдож байна Дашаа.
Мэдлэл харагдаж байна уу?
Харагдаж байна.
За сайн байцгаана уу? Та бүхэнд өнөөдрийн мэнд төргий. намайг ашигладаг Novelsoft компани software engineer гэдэг. За өнөөдөр миний хувьд та бүхэндээ тест комплект дээр тест автоматжуулалт хийхнийг арга болох behavior-driven development буюу BDD-ийн талаар товч тайлбар болон өөрсдийн хийсэн туршлагаас хуваалцаад демо нэг хувилбарыг ажиллуулж үзүүлэх болно. За тэгээд тест комплект дээр болохоор тест автоматжуулалт хийх үндсэн 2 арга байгаа. Нэг нь болохоор keyboard testing, нөгөөх нь одоогийн танилцуулах behavior-driven development буюу BDD. За keyboard testing-ийн хувьд бол өмнөх презентацийн дээр бол ерөөдөө тайлбарлаад өгсөн байгаа. За BDD маань юу гэсэн үг вэ гэхээр бизнес болон техникийн аргыг хослуулад софтвер хөгжүүлэхний арга байгаа. За тэгээ BDD-г болохоор энгийн хэл болох Gherkin гэдэг хэлэн дээр бичдэг. За Gherkin хэл маань болохоор техникийн бос буюу за ямар нэгэн програм мэддэг хүн ч хүртэл ойлгох боломжтой хэл байдаг. За энэ улаанаар хүрээлсэн хэсэгт маань за тухайн Gherkin хэлний маань ерхий бүтц маань харагдаж байна. За ерөөдөө энгийнээр тайлбарлавал таны тест кейсийн ерөөдөө хийх үйлдэлүүд маань байна гэсэн үг. За тэгээд тухайн BDD хийхдээ сценариод ингэж ангилж бичдэг байгаа. За сценарио нь болохоор үндсэн 3 түлхүүрийг ашигладаг. Given, when, then. За given, when, then маань болохоор тус бүрийн үүрэгтэй. Given маань болохоор тухайн тест кейс эхлэх анхдагч нөхцөлөө бичиж өгнө. Жишээлбэл ямар нэг хуудас аль хуудаснаас эхлэх вэ гэх мэт. Жишээл нүүр хуудаснаас эхлэх үү, өөр хуудаснаас эхлэх үү. За when дээр болохоор тухайн ямар нэг үйлдэлээ тодорхойлж өгдөг. Жишээлбэл ямар нэгэн баатан дээр дарах нэвтрэх нэр нууц үгээ оруулах гэх мэт. За дэн дээр болохоор тухайн өмнөх хийсэн үйлдэлийг баталгаажуулах нөхцөлөө бичиж өгдөг. Жишээлбэл нэвтрэх товч дээр дарсан бол үндснээр хуудас руу орно гэх мэтлэн тухайн тест кейсийн степээ бичиж өгнө гэсэн үг. За тэгээ энэ зүүн гар талд маань BDD тест хийх үндсэн хэсэг маань харагдаж байна. Үүн дээр болохоор цааны хэлсэнчлэн тест кейсээ бичих сценарио бичих файл, тухайн тест кейсүүдийн степүүдийг ямар үйл хийх вэ гэдгийг бичих скрипт файл маань байгаа. За тэгээд тест кейс BDD дээр хийх үндсэн арга дараал маань болохоор эхлээд мэдээж тест кейсээ гаргах байгаа. За тест кейсээ гаргаад түүнийг тест комплектийн сценарио руу хөрвүүлж бичнэ. Саяны Gherkin хэлний дагуу. За тэгээд тухайн степүүдийг хийх үйлдэлүүдээ скриптээр бичнэ. За скрипт маань Python, Java гэх мэт хэлээр бичих боломжтой. За тэгээд сценариогоо бичиж дуусны дараа бид нэр тест кейсээ ажиллуулна. Ажиллуулахын тулд execution plan руу оруулаад project run хийнэ. За тэгээд run хийгээд дуусаад бид нэр project-ийн үр дүнгийг энэ project suite логоос харах боломжтой. За ингээд бодит тест complete програм дээр тайлбарлаад өгье гэж бодож байна. За түрүүний хэлсэнчлэн энд болохоор BDD тест хийх project маань байна. Энд дээр болохоор өмнөх презентацийн дээр тайлбарласан keyboard тест байна. За BDD маань keyboard-оос ер нь ялгарах гол онцлог маань за keyboard цааны тайлбарласны дагуу та өөрийнхөө хийх үйлдэлээр рекорд бичиж авчна гэсэн үг. Тэгээд тухайн рекордоо бичиж авч хадгалаад тухайн рекордоо ажиллуулад таны одоо веб аппликейшн юм уу мобайл аппликейшн яг хийсэн рекордын дагуу ажиллаж байгааг үг шалгаад танд үр дүнгийг үзүүлэх бол BDD бол рекорд бичих шаардлагагүй та өөрийнхөө хийх үйлдэл степүүдээ тодорхойлж өгөөд тэрнийхэн дагуу ажиллана гэсэн үг. За энэ болохоор BDD маань харагдах байдал маань энэ байна. За үүний дараа тухайн тест кейсээ ажиллуулад гарсан үр дүнгээ энэ project suite logs буюу эндээс харах боломжтой. Энэ болохоор BDD дээр хийсэн тест кейсийн үр дүн харна. Энэ keyboard дээр хийсэн тестийн үр дүн харна гэсэн үг. За түрүүний тест кейс хийх, тест автоматжуулалт хийх дарааллын дагуу эхлээд тест кейсээ гаргах ёстой. За өнөөдөр үзүүлэх демо project-нд болохоор манай Novelsoft компани хөгжүүлэлтийн нийгмийн даатгал эрхээ газрын SEO гэдэг веб аппликейшн байгаа. Үүн дээр үндсэн 3 тест кейс гаргасан. Нэгт болохоор логин буюу нэвтрэх хуудас шалгах, дараа нь нэвтэрч орсныхон дараа ямар нэгэн хайлт хийх функцийг шалгаад түрэн дээр болохоор нэхэмжлэгийн дугаараар хайж байгаа юм. Тэгээд нэхэмжлэгийн дугаараар хайгаад тухайн нэхэмжлэгийн төлбөрийг шалгаад за шалгалт дуусныхан дараа лог аут хийгээд аппликейшнээс гарч гинөө гэдгийг шалгах үндсэн тест кейс гаргаад тухайн тест кейс хийх кейсийн степүүдийг бичиж өгсөн байгаа. За жишээлбэл логин хийх хэсэг маань эхлээд мэдээж нэвтрэх нуур хуудас руугаа орно. Дараа нь нэвтрэх нэр нууц үгээ оруулаад нэвтрэх товчийг дарна. Үүний дараа үндсэн нуур хуудас руу орсон бол за тест кейс success болно гэсэн үг. За энэ бэлтгэсэн тест кейсийн дагуу за BDD буюу behavior driven development дээр сценарио дээр энэ feature file үүсгээд жишээлбэл саяны 3 тест кейс бол үүсгэсний дагуу login, logout, нэхэмжил төлөв шалгах гэдэг 3 feature file-аа үүсгээд дотор нь түрүүний тайлбарчлан Görkin хэлний дагуу степүүдээ ингээд бичиж өгчнө гэсэн үг. За энэ login хийх дараалал нь байна. За энэ logout хийх дараалал хэрэглэгч энэ товч дээр дараад гарах товчон дээр дараад тэгээ нэвтрэх нуур хуудас руу шилжсэн байна уу гэдгийг шалгаад хамгийн сүүлд ашигласан browser руу хаажна гэсэн үг. За нэхэмжлэх төлөв шалгах юугаа бол ингээд өөрсдийнхөө гаргасан степүүдийн дагуу бичиж өгчнө. За ингээд нэвтэрж ороод тухайн хайлт шалгах тесрүүг орсон байна. Тэгээд тухайн нэхэмжлэгийн дугаар буюу доор бичсэн энэ утгуудын дагуу нэхэмжлэгийн дугаараа аваад хайгаад тэгээд төлөвөө энэ доор бичсэн төлөвүүдийн дагуу харьцуулаа шалгачна гэсэн үг. За жишээлбэл ингэж ерөөдөө бичсэн байгаа. За жишээлбэл логин хийх скрипт үзье. Скрипт маань ерөөдөө логин хийх үйлдэлүүдийн ерөөдөө хийх үйлдэлүүдийг Python хэлэн дээр бичиж өгсөн гэсэн үг. За жишээлбэл нэвтрэх нуур хуудас руу орно гэсэн скрипт маань эхлээд Chrome браузероо нээгээд за Prime-ыг буюу өмнө бичигдсэн урал байгаа. Урлаараа ачаална гэсэн үг. За ачаалж дуусаад дараа нь нэвтрэх нэр хуудас руу шилжсэн бол за username, password оруулна. За username оруулах text box-оо энэ дээр тодорхойлоод өгсөн байна. За энийг харахын тулд control дараад ороход name mapping руу шилжээд за энэ зургаар бас харагддаг энэ хэсгээр дарж гинэ гэсэн үг. За тэгээд тухайн username хийх text box дээр клик дараад клик дарна гэвэл цэг кликээ бичиж өгдөг. За тэрэн дээр нь username-аа оруулахын тулд set text гээд тухайн username-аа оруулаад өгнө гэсэн үг. За энүүнтэй адилхан password-тоо бас адилхан оруулж байгаа. Password box-оо сонгоод дээр нь password нэг гэсэн replace нууц үгээ авчиж гинэ гэсэн үг. За үүний дараа нэвтрэх товчон дээр дарна гэдэг скрипт маань button гэсэн keyboard маань энэ зураг дээр харагдж адилхан энэ товчон дээр дарж гинэ гэсэн үг. За энэ гих мэтлээ ингээд эхлээд бид нэр тест кейсийн дагуу Görkin хэлэн дээр бичээд дараа нь скриптээр тухайн степ болгоны хийх үйлдэлийг бичээд өгч байна гэсэн үг. За одоо ингээд бэлэн болсон бол ажилуулна. Ажилуулсан тулд өмнө хийсэнчлэн execution plan-аа нээгээд за жишээлбэл бид эхлээд логин хийнэ. Логин оруулна. Дараа нь нэхэмжлийн төлбөрөөр хайгаад дараа нь log out хийнэ. Гэт ингээд хийсэн сценариудаа ингээд оруулж өгөх боломжтой гэсэн үг. За энийг ажилуулсан тулд run project-д дарна. За би Chrome яагаад ажилуулъя. Өөрөө Chrome нэгээд өгсөн урлагийн дагуу ачаална гэсэн үг. Одоо энэ дээр нэхэмжлэлийн дугаараа бичиж өгч байна. Сая дата лүп ашиглаад хоёр нэхэмжлэлийн дугаараар хайхаар байсан учраас одоо хоёр дахь нэхэмжлэлийн дугаараар хайж байна гэсэн үг. За одоо ингээ хоёр нэхэмжлэлийн дугаараар хайгаад дууссан. Одоо log out хийхээ шалгаж байна. За ингээд бид нэр үр дүнгээ харъя. Үр дүн дээр болохоор нийт 3 тест кейс шалгасан байна. Түүнээс 3 гуруула пасс болсон байна. Тэгэд үндсэн үр дүнгээ харах боломжтой. За тэгээ бас тест кейс болгоны руугаа ороод за түрүүн бас өмнөх презентацийн дээр үзүүлсэн тухайн степ болгон дээр юу хийсэн байна вэ гэдэг ингээд үр дүнгийг харуулж байгаа. Тэгээ үр дүнгийг болохоор доор энэ зургаар бас харах боломжтой. Тест комплектийн нэг давуу тал нь болохоор энэ тухайн хийс өгөл болгоно скриншот хийгээд авчдаг. Болохоор ингээд маш давуу тал болж байгаа. За ингээд миний презентацийн дуслаа. Анхаарал тавьсанд баярлалаа. Асуулт байвал асууж болно.
За баярлалаа Таша. За сая нэлээдгүй ойлгомжтой явж байгаа шүү гэн. За энэ дээр асуух асуултууд байна уу? За энэ дээр асуулт байна уу? За. Таша чат руу ороод хараарай, бэлгүүнээ юм асууж. Selenium puppeteer гэх мэт байдаг тэдгээрийг ашигладаг уу гинэ? Байна уу?
За саяны асуултанд хариулъя. Сайн байна уу? Ер нь бол яг хоо боломж нь бол байдаг. Гэхдээ туршилт юм хүн хийхэд бол бас нэмэлт юу шаардлагатай плагин юм хүмүүс бол нэмэлт оруулж ирээд явах ийм боломжтой байгаа. Энэ дээр яг тантай эргэж холбогдоод илүү зориулсан демонстрашн юм үзүүлээд явах байгаа шүү.
За баярлалаа. За юу яа хэдүүлээ одоо ер нь бол Q&A хэсэг явах хэвээр. Тэгээд өмнөх одоо Кристоф болон Дашин демо презентацуудаас асуулт байвал үлдээгээрэй. За тэгээд асуулт одоохондоо байхгүй болвол хэдүүлээ вебинараа одоо ингээд хааж болж байна. За эргээд би хамгийн гол нь өнөөдөр явагдсан бүх вебинаруудыг жиргээд хэсэг хэсгээр нь болгоод та бүхэн рүү имэйлээр айгуу сайхан цэгцтэй явуулаад өгье. За энэ дээр presentation болон үнэгүй ашиглах демо, trial-ууд, useful links, за тэгээд видеонуудыг хуваагаад явуулъя. За бусдаас нь өөр асуулт байна уу? Okay. Christoph and Ken, thank you for joining us today's webinar. Do you have any speech to close up this webinar?
No, I just want to say thank you for everyone for joining this webinar. Yeah, it's been good. And if there's any questions on anything that you've seen today, obviously you can contact myself or the SmartBear team in Australia, but also obviously Novelsoft. So we'll be happy to help with any questions you have. But yeah, thank you for hosting this webinar. Yeah, and hope everyone has a good day.
Yeah, thank you, Christoph. За тэгээд таад юу яхан бол асуулт байх юм бол нөгөө урилга явуулсан имэйл рүү бас урилган дээрээ бас утасны дугааруудыг дурдсан байгаа. Тэдрэлгүй эргээд хандаж болно. Бид хэд Christoph-той холбоотой байдаг болохоор шууд дамжуулж өгч юм уу? Эсвэл бол ямар нэгэн шийдэл асуудал гарч ирвэл одоо шийдэл олоход нь тусланаа. За асуулт байхгүй бол өнөөдөр хэдүүлээ өнөөдрийнхөө вебинарыг ингээд өндөрлөцгөөе. За өнөөдрийн вебинарт оролцсон та бүхэнд маш их баярлалаа. За бид хэд софтвер хөгжүүлэгч одоо үндсэн дээр тий өөрсдөө ашиглаж байгаа технологи туршлагуудыг бас жижигээр ингээд вебинар болгоод салбарынхандаа ингээд хүргэх маш их сонирхолтой байдаг. Тэгээ ер нь бол sharing is caring гэж ярьдаг штэ. За тэгээд дараагийн вебинарууд бол эх онд төлөвлөгдсөн байгаа. За тэгээд дараа уулзцгаая. Баярлалаа.